So, in episode one, I shared some stories about my family. In particular, some of my favourite memories from my childhood in Adelaide with my mum and her extended family. Oh, my mum is from the most magical family. My grandfather was one of many children. He had beautiful brothers and sisters, and they just adored each other, just wanted to have fun together. They're very musical, lots of singers and actors, and a lot of political discourse and spirited, lively conversation, and just having fun together. My grandfather has long passed away, and so have all of his siblings, but one, my Auntie Babe, and she recently passed away. And her funeral was the most exquisite celebration of life. She was a beautiful woman, really beloved by our family, but they did such a beautiful job of honoring that entire generation that has now passed. And my mum and her siblings and cousins have decided to get together and record stories about that time with their parents so that the legacy of that chapter lives on for all of us. And it got me thinking about genealogy and how important it is to understand our past and how it informs our sense of identity and sense of belonging. And so, a lot of us get Christmas presents, family trees or a subscription, to Ancestry or 23andMe and all of these services. And it's about this time of year where we go, oh, I got that. Oh, okay, what do I do with it? I should probably look into that. And I don't know about you, but I find it a little bit overwhelming. There's so much information online now, which is wonderful. But where do you start? How do you navigate it? And how do you then authenticate any information that you might find? Because not all of it's accurate because we can, all upload things and stuff like that. So a genealogist can really help you navigate that journey so you can maximize your time, energy, and resources. And so I contacted my friend Dana Jones, who's a genealogist out of Los Angeles. And oh my goodness, when she started telling me stories about her job, you could kind of mistaken her life for a chapter in a novel. Some of the things that she uncovers when she's working with her clients. And I got some really great practical tips about how to use the full amount of resources on Ancestry and 23andMe and these resources, and how you then sift through things in order to make sense of it. So I just thought it'd be great for you to learn about it as well, because it's just so fascinating. When you enter a portal into someone else's world, this microcosm of society, and you go, oh, this is fascinating. How did I not know about this? So I think you are just going to dig what she has to say. So let's get the skinny from Dana Jones. Oh, Dana, I am so excited to be talking to you and diving into the world of genealogy today, because my family and I are just completely obsessed about who we are, where we came from, where other people came from, our ancestors. It is just such a fascinating field. So I want to start at the beginning, well, so to speak, of this chapter, where after graduating from Vanderbilt University with a degree in communications and having this 25-year career in the corporate world in communications and brand management and consumer insights, you pivoted
Yes.
into going into your passion of genealogy. I know that's a passion in your family. You've been interested in it for many years, but just take me into that it has to be me moment during the pandemic where you were on medical leave and you just went, you know what, I'm doing something different.
Exactly. Exactly. So yes, I went off on medical leave right before, literally a month and a half before the pandemic started. So that was a big shift too.
And what had happened to you medically?
I was, I did not have great leaders who were supporting me as an executive. And I had been
Mm.
there for many years, and it was just really becoming something that was not a good brain space.
Yeah, so it was a stress related
Correct.
condition, right? Wow. That,
100%.
I mean, that happens to so
Yes.
many people,
Yeah.
and they don't actually listen to the it
Yeah.
has to be me to make a
Yeah.
change. Like, this is not a healthy place for me to
Exactly.
be in. So
Yeah.
you were listening to that it
I
has to
was.
be me,
I
and
was.
kind of it does not have to be me anymore. I'm going to make a change.
Exactly.
So out of all the millions of things that you could be doing,
Mhm.
why genealogy? What was that?
Well,
It has to be me. I'm
yeah.
doing this.
Well, as you mentioned, it was something that I had had a passion for many, many years, really on both sides of my family. My mother's family, her maiden name is a German name. They came over in the 1740s, and there were, I think, 11 of them.
Yeah.
And so I was able to learn about that family, meet some of her other relatives, that knew about the family, that had, lots of information about them. We have this giant family book that's about this thick that I could use as a doorstop if I need to, but it's also a lot of
Wow.
really amazing information about.
And that had already been assembled for you and your family?
Definitely,
Oh, so
definitely.
people in your family were into this.
Yes, yes, yes. And then on my dad's side, my granddad, his father, was a huge genealogy fan. And once he was a retired human, he didn't really
Retired human.
he didn't really use a computer in his
Yeah.
70s and 80s and into his 90s, but he would call people and he would pay people and he would get people to do work. And he was a really great artist and writer. And he created these giant butcher block paper family trees of all sorts of
Wow.
different parts of my history. And so he gifted those to us, which we've now scanned and have available online, but I also
Yeah.
still have the originals. So it was really something. And I actually joined ancestry.com about 18 years ago to
Yeah.
try to help him because
Okay.
he had a brick wall, and that brick wall was his grandfather, and he never knew what happened to his grandfather. He knew where he moved after the grandmother had passed, but he did not know what had happened to him. And I still, sadly, to this day, have not been able to solve that brick wall, but it's certainly still on my list.
Ooh, is that a source of frustration for you when you hit that brick wall? Because you talk about that in your work.
Yeah.
So you help other people
Yes.
smash down or move through the brick wall.
Yes.
Oh gosh, what's that like for you that you just have not been able to find that missing piece?
It's very frustrating. And there'll be moments where I'm not working on family stuff at all, my own family, and I'll just say, let me go look for this, or maybe it's here, or let me reach out
Yeah.
to this person that's in the state that I think he was living in when he passed. And I don't know the year he passed. I know kind of the approximate time. I know the place that my granddad thought he passed, which was here in the US, but not in the state where they had lived. And so supposedly he worked, as a miner. And there were a lot of mining accidents and things, and a lot of them were in the newspaper, but I've just never been able to come to that. So
Yeah, and it's gonna get easier. Or you tell me, maybe I'm wrong about this because everything is digital and online and we're able to search for things. Is it easier with later generations to smash through that brick wall and find the answers and put the pieces of the puzzle together with
I'll have
more
to
online resources?
Yeah, I'll have to say it depends because there's never going to be
Ooh,
a moment where
tell me
everything
that.
is online. There's never going to be a time. If you think about,
Right.
and I know you're not always in the US, but just if I'm mentioning that, if you think about every county in the United States of America that has its own courthouse, its own
Yes, of
all of the
course.
things, its own records of births, marriages, and deaths, its records of things that happened in court, deeds, and estates, and all of that. There's a point where never is all of that going to be all online. Some of it is now, some of it
Ooh,
happens every single day, gets added, but there's so much. And then if you think about the rest of the world, Family Search, which is run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints and is pretty much the largest place to go do in person research, but they also digitize plenty. And after all of the horror uh, in Europe recently with some of the wars, they've started going in and um, doing even more digitizing because there were literally churches that were being bombed, and therefore
wow.
all of those records that were in that church were
We're
gone,
destroyed.
were
Wow.
destroyed. Yeah, and then they also go to places, like for instance, places in Africa, and they do oral histories with the
Oh,
folks that have
wow.
learned things over time that they've just been told that there's never going to be
Yes.
anything in writing about, and so they're
Yes.
able to record that and then be able to put that out so that people can access it. But then again, if you think about how many people, how many places, it's never going to all be online. It just can't
Yes,
be.
of course. So you talk about how you love puzzles.
Yes.
and the container store is your happy place, and you love
Absolutely.
organization.
Yeah.
So do you have to be extremely patient to be a genealogist, to actually sift through information, keep searching, getting is it like a little bit like being in a maze? That's how I imagine it from the outside, where you think you're going to go down a path and you're going to find the answer, and then you hit a brick wall, and then you got to go down,
Right.
walk backwards and then go down another path.
It's very much like that. You really have to be, detail oriented, think about the different places that you could go to look for something. And,
Yeah,
certainly starting online usually happens just because that's the easiest starting point.
yeah,
But a lot of times what you're finding online is where you need to then, write to someone and ask them to tell you what they have or to order something from someone. Even when I'm needing things here in California and I need somebody's birth certificate, I usually have to write off and wait several months for it to come back to me from the state. And, it depends. Again, it depends on
it
every
depends
state.
on what the mission is, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly. But knowing kind of what you found, where you found it, where you still need to look some more, that's all very important.
Yeah, so it's a real exercise in patience on your
Yeah,
part and the part of your client, where it could take
definitely.
months and months and months, sometimes years, to
Sometimes,
uncover the information. So the scope of your work would vary dramatically
yeah,
depending on the scope of the mission.
yeah,
It's
of
like
course.
Mission Impossible. Um, so let's just start from the same point of reference, so that, dear listener, we are all understanding exactly what Dana does. So how would you describe genealogy, the process of genealogy?
Sure. So, in the easiest, I guess, of terms, it's looking at both who you come from, who your ancestors were, where they came from, how long they had been wherever you are now, your family. And
Yeah.
also, in many cases, I'm working with people who are looking for current relatives and may not know who their current
Yeah.
relatives are. And so, not every client is like that, but genealogy can go either way. It can be ancestors or it can be current or more recent family members and, where
Yeah.
they're from.
So talk me through the process. When someone comes to hire you, what information do you have to provide? I mean, I imagine it's, dependent on the scope of the mission, but
Of
and the
course.
goal of what you want to figure out. But what are some of the things that you would need to have available in order to start following those breadcrumbs, so to speak?
Absolutely. So, at the very bare minimum, if somebody's, for instance, wanting to know about a grandfather or a great grandfather, having, or great grandmother, having that information about their birth, their death, hopefully where those two things happened, are really the basic starting point. Because I don't ever want to research someone that I think I'm researching the right grandfather, but it's actually the name is right, but it's not the right person. Because if you think about, I married a Jones, there's plenty of Joneses out
Yeah.
there.
Oh
So,
gosh, how many Joneses are there in the world?
exactly.
Wow.
So when I
Yeah.
think about even researching my husband's family, I have to be really careful that I'm getting the right Joneses, even if I'm looking in the right part of Kentucky where they lived. So
Yeah.
I
Gosh,
need
that gives new meaning to Keep Up with the Joneses, doesn't it? Which
totally,
Joneses are you talking about?
totally,
Wow.
totally. But just really
S-
making sure that you've got the right people is really the key starting point.
Yeah. So you talk in your history about how you were an only child,
Hmm.
and now you have an only child, a
Yes,
son.
yes.
When you were growing up, even though both sides of your family were interested in their history and
Hmm.
interested in the past and
Hmm.
how that related to the present, how did that affect your sense of belonging and wanting to make sense of who you were and how you fit into the world when you didn't have a sibling to play with or relate to or bounce off of, and you were constantly dealing with people of a different generation within your family? What did
Right.
that feel like for you? Did that sort of inform your further interest in this, or how did that work?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, all of my grandparents had siblings and had siblings that lived nearby. And so there were always family members that we would visit. We wouldn't necessarily see them all the time, but we would see them a lot. And when we would see them, everybody talked about family and everybody talked about past family that was no longer with us. And, um, my dad's mother, my grandmother, was one of 11 children. Most of them
Wow.
only had one, oddly enough, when they were one of 11.
Wow.
Um, but one of her siblings was killed or died, not was killed, died in World War II. And so that was something that was often talked about in the family.
Mm.
There were things on his sister's wall that reminded her of him that were had come from the president, and there were moments like that. And I remember I interviewed my grandmother, that same grandmother, one year for school, and we were supposed to talk about the depression, and so I was supposed to ask her about the Great Depression, and she said, well, honey, you probably should have talked to your granddad because it was a bigger deal for them. We were just poor people, and it was poor regardless. So
Right.
so there were always a lot of things that, would come up either as a school project or just something that family members continue to talk about.
And what are some of the things that you've uncovered about your own family?
Yeah, I
Because
think
gosh, you've got some interesting stories about
I,
that.
I do. I think the biggest, most shocking thing that I discovered, and this was before I became a professional, um, I was doing some research on the side about my grandmother, that grandmother I was just speaking of, and her 11 siblings, but also her father's siblings. And
Yeah.
her dad lived next door to his brother, and his brother had a whole bunch of children too. And I found this document that said he had been killed by his ex-wife one night in his bed while he was sleeping with
Whoa.
some of his small children maybe sleeping next to him. And I called my mom and I said, hey, have you ever heard about this? My dad didn't have a smartphone, so I couldn't text him or call him easily at the
Yeah.
time. And so she said, well, no, I've never heard of it, but I'll check with him. And the next response I got was, he has no idea what you're talking about. So
Oh,
my grandmother had been 14 years old, living next door to this uncle and his family of many children. He was divorced. She knew he was divorced. This woman came back literally at like midnight one night and shot him dead. And her father, my great grandfather, was the constable in the town, and so he ended up having to help get this woman into jail to wait for her to have, they had to move her trial to another county
whoa.
because there was so much. This man was a very beloved person, her uncle who had been killed, and she ended up having a very scary, sad life too, which I later was able to learn about. And she seemed to have a lot of mental health issues. And so that's one of those things that it would be very interesting if there were a way to know. And I'm sure there's not, given how medical information can be known. But even now,
Yeah.
to be able to know more about what had caused her to maybe act the way she did, she was never put in prison, other than just jail when she was
Mm.
originally arrested. She did not have to go to prison later for that, and moved off and married someone else, and ultimately was, put in a home where she had to live the rest of her life. So there was definitely some mental illness, and so understanding that,
Yeah.
it never came up in my family. So it certainly wasn't something we talked about at the dinner table of,
Yeah.
the aunt
Well,
had a
phew,
mental illness.
now I can sort of understand why you're interested in true crime. I mean, it's sort of this whole thing of fact is stranger than fiction. I mean,
Yeah.
it it, it is really interesting though to look at this generational trauma
Hmm.
and how understanding what has happened in previous generations in your family can absolutely shed light on
100%.
why you may be struggling or your parents or grandparents are the way that they are
100%.
and the value of knowing your history.
Hmm.
So, what are some of the main reasons, the most common reasons why somebody would engage your services and be interested in their genealogy?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variety, within that world. Some people are very interested in joining societies that their ancestors kind of give them credit for being a part of. So if you
Ooh,
think
tell me about that.
if you think about the U.S., it would be like the Daughters of the American Revolution. So if you have
Oh, yes.
a
Okay.
male or female relative who either served with or gave um, things to help, those who were fighting for the American British War,
Yeah.
you can join. You just have to have the proof. So I've definitely done that for clients. I've done it for myself. There's other things like the Mayflower, who, if you can prove that your ancestors came to America on the Mayflower. That's a separate organization. Even from where I'm from in Tennessee, there's one I've got on my list of the first people who moved to Tennessee before it was even really Tennessee. There's a whole separate organization you can join if you can prove that. There's farmers organizations if you can prove that your family were farmers. So there's all sorts of
Right.
different things. So a lot of times people just want that. They want to be able to check that off, or have the certificate, or have the pin, or whatever it is, and just that be a part of their life. There's also people who want to know, for instance, let's say a grandfather had not been a very good human,
Yeah.
and my client's daughter then wanted to learn things about the father that was not great, so that she could know more about him, because she you know, didn't feel good about her relationship. And so, to your
Mm.
earlier point about understanding kind of the trauma and what happens that then creates things, I think that can be really key. Um, to
Mm.
understand, if somebody wasn't a great human being, there could have been a really good reason why. And there might not have been, but
Yes.
there could have been. There could have been trauma that they had encountered, or situations that they went through. I have one client who I've worked with a lot, who um, is her father's Japanese American, and both of his parents were incarcerated during World War II here in the U.S.
Mm.
That's not a really great thing to be able to, research, but at the same time,
Yeah.
it's so helpful to understand, and for her dad to then understand why some of the things that happened in his family happened, because
Yes. I
um,
mean, I imagine this happens a lot with Holocaust survivors and
yeah,
Jewish families
yes,
and people in Africa that have been through war-torn districts. And,
yes,
I mean, there's so many examples of this.
yes.
So what's that like for you as a professional when
Mhm.
you are immersing yourself in the puzzle of that world, in the maze of that world, and you're investigating a really trauma-filled chapter?
Yeah,
So
well,
how do you deal with that on a personal level?
mhm.
And then I want to know how you communicate that sensitive information to the client.
Right, right. It's definitely a great question. From on a personal level, I think it's back where that puzzle kind of comes in for me, because I'm thinking about it, of how I can put the puzzle together. And so
Yeah.
knowing before the puzzle gets put together that it may not be a perfect puzzle that you are
Mm.
thrilled to have put together. And so that's usually where I'm coming from, is just really to be as helpful and straightforward as I can be.
Well, your degree in communications probably
Yeah.
comes in handy there, right? In your 25 years of analytics and brand management. I mean, it's interesting in
Exactly.
life how all of our skills come together if we allow
Definitely.
our superpowers to flourish and
Definitely.
come to the fore, right?
Definitely. Definitely. And then when I really think about helping, what I'm going to tell the folks, if it's somebody who comes to me and doesn't come and say, "Oh, I think I had kind of a not so great human being relative that I want to know more about." But if they come to me and say, "Hey, I just want to research my family,"
Mm.
and I find something that's not as
Ooh, and they're not
informative.
expecting the horror.
Exactly. So there's got to be
Ooh.
some kind of back and forth between me and them to say, "Do you want to know this?" And
Right. So do you go to them and say, "Look, I've uncovered some things that you
yeah,
may not be expecting. Do
yes,
you want to know about this? Do you want me to keep exploring it
yes,
further?" Is that the
yes,
dialogue
yes,
where
100%.
you renegotiate the parameters of the mission, so to
Exactly.
speak?
Exactly. Exactly. Because I never want to tell somebody something I've discovered that they don't want to know about. Um,
Yes.
and that can happen with families, if I'm working with people's DNA as well. But it can also happen if I'm just looking at the records and looking at what people did in their lives, and who ended up in prison, or who ended up killing their husband, like my great great uncle, or whatever that situation was. You just don't always know what you're going to find until you find it. And so then really making sure that a
Ooh.
client wants to know, I'm not going to tell them unless
Yes.
they want to know.
Oh, so this your passion for true crime and your love of puzzles, you're just living inside a puzzle every
Yeah.
day and
Yeah.
potentially a true crime novel
Yes.
every
Exactly.
every week, potentially.
Exactly. It's possible.
Whoa, so it does this fascinating journey that's different
Mhm.
every single day.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, I could just dive into that all day long. This is just so juicy. I mean, everyone's got a fascinating history, don't
Mhm.
they? You know, there is
Absolutely.
this concept that, oh, if I'm not a celebrity, if I'm not famous, if one of my relatives wasn't famous in history, that I don't have an interesting story.
Not
And
at all.
everybody has an interesting story.
Definitely. Definitely. There's
Yeah.
always something
Wow.
there.
Yeah.
Oh,
So you've been talking about America, obviously, because you
yeah.
live in America. I'm half American too. I
Right.
spent half my year in America, lived in America for decades. What happens? Because we all come from somewhere else.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, America was founded based on immigrants, right?
Exactly.
So what do you do when you're researching someone's family tree and you start going back
Mhm.
generations and all of a sudden you're having to deal with the archives and public records
Mhm.
of other countries and other languages?
Yeah, it
So
can
how does
be
that work for
it
you?
it can be interesting. I'm lucky in my own work in the sense that my family, pretty much, and my husband's family were all early adopters of the American experience, and they were all here really early.
Yeah.
So I am not really dealing with a lot of super recent things that would be in German or French or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Um, However, then of course I've had a lot of clients that, we don't have to go very far back to be in the country where their ancestors were from. So sometimes it's a matter of me hiring someone who can help translate things for me and provide me with details that I might not know if I had not been from that country.
I mean,
About
so much gets lost in translation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the
Yeah.
good news is there's so many professional genealogists now. We have quite a few who live in other countries. And so am
Yes.
able to find someone through our network that is a genealogist and is in the country I'm trying to research, which is,
Oh, of
win-win.
course. Yes.
And so that's helpful. Sometimes it's also the need to have someone in a country, be able to find something for me that I can't find online because it's not online. And, I had one client one time who needed something in August. And guess what? July is when everybody in that country goes on vacation. So trying to get what I needed to get from from that country
Yeah.
in July was definitely a hard one. We were able to make it work. But yeah, it's really about making sure each of the projects has the right help, that I need because, I don't speak all the languages and I
Yeah.
haven't
You
been involved
don't, Dana?
English and Southern. That's about all I can offer you.
Oh my goodness. So how many genealogists are there in the world? I mean, estimated amount.
Oh gosh, in the world, that's a good question. I think we have about 300 to 400 who are professionals from the Association of Professional Genealogists, of which I'm a member. And so that's typically where I look for people if I need help, either
So
going somewhere.
that's not that many.
It's not, but then I would say there's probably more.
Yeah.
It's just hard to know beyond that, like how many there would be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I mean, I would classify that as a very specialized field then.
Yeah,
So, is it a very supportive, tight knit community, in
yeah,
this association where you really do support each other? And
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
wow. Because I mean, I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that as you said before, it would attract high information gatherers, people
Yes.
that are patient, people that
Mhm.
are sensitive,
Right.
people that want to go down the rabbit hole and into the maze and figure out puzzles and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's quite a solitary endeavor, I would imagine,
It can
what you
be.
do.
It can be. It can be. Um,
Yeah.
some clients want to be more involved with what you're doing than others. Some people just want you to send them a report, and some people want to be more like, let's have a call every couple of weeks and hear what you found. And, so it
Yeah.
kind of depends on the client.
So it
And
can look a lot of different ways. You can
it can.
absolutely participate in this process, because I would imagine, dear listener, you might be one of the people that would absolutely geek out on that and absolutely
Right.
love this. So do you get people who want to come and figure this out as a gift for somebody? I would imagine that
Yes.
would be a beautiful gift for
Yes.
somebody.
Yes. I have done that several times for clients, and it's so fulfilling for me, because I'm doing the work for whoever's giving the gift, but at the same time, then I'm also doing it for the person getting the gift. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a
take me inside of that a little bit more. What's fulfilling about it for you doing this work?
I think that just helping people understand where they came from and why things happened that happened. I mean, to our earlier conversation about, trauma and understanding why certain things happen that you might not have wanted to happen. There's a lot of
Mm,
times that you can learn that when you're researching the family. You're not just looking at birth certificates and death certificates and marriage certificates. You're looking at court records and you're looking at, you know, deeds and things and really understanding, why people did and how people did what they did. Which ship they were on when they moved here and how long it took them to get here and how many people were on the ship that lived when they got here versus those that passed on their way. There's so many different things about a family experience depending on what you're looking at. If you're talking about somebody who may have come to Ellis Island in, the 1800s,
mm.
versus, my people who were on some ship in 1748 and we
Yeah.
get here. So, and there's no records really about that ship they were on. So, it really can be fulfilling to be able to bring kind of the full circle, the full information about why a family is the way they are now because of
Yeah,
what's happened, and either they've known about it or they haven't known about it.
yeah, like threading the needle,
Yeah.
and you just keep threading the needle and the
Mhm.
thread never ends. I mean,
Right.
literally. So, what is the typical starting point? I want to ask you about ancestry.com that's just
Mhm.
become this global phenomenon and a brand
Right.
that everybody knows and
Right.
recognizes. What is ancestry.com good for and what are the limitations of it?
Okay. And I spend many hours a day, every day on ancestry.com for many
Yeah.
reasons. Um,
Tell me about that.
so first of all, they do have a really large amount of digitized records from the
Yeah.
world, not just the US.
Yep.
Um, and so that's a great starting point. They also have people's family trees that can be made public. I
Mm.
don't make my own clients' trees public when I'm creating them on Ancestry. They're completely private. And then if I, give it, if the person wants it when I'm finished, then if they want to make it private, they can once it's their tree.
Yep.
But the public trees you can also use to research because sometimes it might be that you haven't been able to find the right person of with this name, but you're able to find them in somebody else's tree and then see what they've found, so there's sort of
Yes.
some work that way. And then when you think about DNA, Ancestry is the number one um, group or company that has people who have taken DNA tests. And so
Right.
they have, gosh, I can't even remember the number. I'm sure more than 20 million at this point people, and that's people around the
Wow.
world, although a lot of countries have different rules about taking DNA tests. And
Yep.
so not every country can, be part of Ancestry. And about once a year, they were able to update with all the new information. And so everybody's ethnicity changes a little bit once a year because that's when it all gets reevaluated, which
Ooh,
always
yeah.
is going to be based on how many people are in the group. So
Yeah.
I've been having a ton, like 30% Scottish lately, and I do not have 30% of my ancestry. And it just has gone back down, and I've gotten all my Germans back. So that I know about. So, that's been, and I have 3% Native American, which I have no idea where that came from.
Whoa, okay.
So yeah, so it's interesting. There's about four other companies that you can use, and there's one that definitely does a lot with Europe. And so that's usually one that if somebody's needing really recent or even current relatives in Europe, that's maybe where they need to go, but it's a lot smaller group.
What are some of those other resources that you're talking about?
So the second below Ancestry is called 23andMe.
Oh,
And
yes. Yes,
yeah,
that's a very
so
famous one.
so
Yes.
they have trees and they don't really do records. So you're going to not really find birth certificates, death certificates, all that through 23andMe. What you can find out is, you know, if you eat asparagus, do you smell funny? Or, um, they have, and they do serious things too about breast cancer and other things. So that's one
Right.
reason that people like to go there. Um, the there's one called My Heritage, and
Yes.
that is the one that has more of the European folks. And then family, let me think, make sure I'm giving you the right name. Family Tree DNA. They have they're the only site that has not just what all the other companies have, which is what Ancestry has, which is autosomal DNA, which is what you have in every cell of your body.
Yep.
And you get them and they kind of merge depending from mom and dad. And, there's also this one company that has um, your mother's DNA, which is always going to be the same. It goes from every mother to every child. And then,
Yes.
um, and you're able to go back millions of years sometimes with how far back this
Whoa.
goes. And it's not always great to find like your close relatives because it's been so long, but it
Yeah.
can be a very interesting thing. I've had my mother, do hers. And then there's the all male one, the Y-DNA, that can give you a lot more information about more recent people and also will give you many, many, many million years back. So there's a
Wow.
reason that some people go there. Sometimes there's a lot of specific um, groups that want to be together that have all of that name in their family and want to try to figure out how they're all related to each other or where they came from in Africa originally. And, there's a lot of longer term things that people would do there. Ancestry is really the only one that has DNA that you can also really do the research there. But
Okay.
it's the
So
tip of
is
the
that
iceberg.
a recommended starting point, is to get your DNA tested in both of those ways, upload it, and then you can see who you are potentially related to in the world?
Definitely, if you have any feeling that you don't know who your ancestors would be.
Right.
Um,
Which is a
you
lot
know,
of adopted people, depending
right,
on whether their adoption is
exactly,
open or closed, or,
exactly,
I mean, so many people get lost through the fostering system or just don't know much about their history.
exactly. I've had clients before who found out that their biological parent wasn't their biological, they thought their biological parent wasn't their biological
Well,
parent.
I mean, that's the thing. People lie all the time to
Yeah,
protect whatever, right? That
exactly,
happens all the time. I
exactly,
know several friends of mine where
exactly.
their, family story has been a bit
Yeah.
skewed.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it was interesting for me to have everybody take their DNA, even though I knew we were all related to each other.
Yeah.
And so, I had my parents, I had my son, I had my husband, I had his mother. Like, we've got a lot of that. And then, but there's nothing that it's telling me that's like shocking at this point, in the
Yes.
work I've done with it. But I've had several clients who it has been shocking. It's found the biological father, it's found
Yes.
the biological relatives and even how this person came into the family he thought he was a part of, or she. So I
Yeah.
think it's important for people to take it, if they're just interested, which is kind of where I was, just to see like
Yeah.
what ethnicity is it giving me, and how much DNA does my kid have of mine versus my husband's, and how much of my ethnicity does he have versus my husband's, and
Yes.
those kinds of things were just interesting. But then if you really are concerned that you have relatives that you don't know who they are, then that's 100% a reason, to take it if you want to know. I mean,
So, are there any drawbacks to having your DNA tests and uploading them to Ancestry or any of these other services? Are there any drawbacks to doing that?
um, it depends on how much privacy you put on them. So
Okay. So
as I mentioned,
you can choose how
correct,
private and how public your
correct,
DNA information is.
correct. So
Okay.
mine, for instance, is always my tree has always been public, and my DNA therefore has been public when I did that. And so I've had people reach out to me that either were my husband's relatives or my relatives that want to know more about the research I've done on their family. Not that they're saying, like, oh, I didn't know I was related to you, but just
Yeah.
they're far enough out that they want to know more about what I've researched. Um,
So if
and
you make it public, you need to be prepared that other people are going to find you and want to know and be connected to you, which some
correct,
people would find amazing and other people would
correct,
find completely,
correct,
invasive.
correct. And so that's why I never make any of my clients' ancestry, either trees or DNA, either one, public. That's their choice down the road when I'm finished. But I'm doing the work and I don't need random other people, contacting me wanting to know how they're related to someone. That's just not what I'm doing the work for.
Yeah. How ethically complicated does it get in a situation, for example, where somebody needed to know if they were related to anyone that might be a match for a kidney or something. I mean, I'm trying to think of other situations where knowing who you're related to can literally be life-saving.
Yeah, so that particular example, there are other ways to do that that are medical and have nothing to do with your ancestry, so to speak.
Okay.
Like you can go, it used to be called Be the Match here in the US. I think it's changed its name, but I know I went and gave them my blood for whatever that would come to me then if somebody needed a kidney that I could give them.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a little bit of a different, it's more of a medical thing.
Yeah.
Um, but
I know that's a really extreme example. It was just one that came into my mind,
yeah,
where I went, ooh, what about, I'm think this is another really extreme example that's coming into my mind, but I'm just so interested by this. You know, there are so many sperm donors now
mhm,
that have donated so much sperm
mhm,
and they have fathered many, many, many
many.
children.
Mhm.
And is that something that's really going to be coming into the fore in the coming decades where
It already
there
is.
are I know somebody where they were at a school with somebody that and their child was related to
Yeah,
somebody else in the class. I mean,
yeah,
this happens now.
yeah. It's already happening, and there's some people are thrilled with that, and some people are not because they thought they were always going to be unknown. And um, I think the same is true with the medical piece because I back to what you were asking. I think a lot of people that do want to do their DNA
Mm,
for a medical reason are people that don't have any idea what their medical history is. And so if they do their DNA, they can also then, if at like 23andMe, where they also will look at cancer and other things beyond whether you're
yeah.
eating asparagus is stinky. Um, and they will, provide you with that information. And so it's a way that you can learn more about your background, even if you're never going to know who the person was that was that biological parent, at least you can find out what kind of medical information they had. And so that same goes true for sperm donors. There have been so many. I've listened to several books on Audible about different people who have kind of gone through that. They thought they were 100%, Jewish and found out they were 50% Jewish when they
Mm,
randomly did their DNA for Christmas one year. And all of a sudden, they're not related to who they thought they were related to. And it was a sperm donor. So, it'll be interesting to see how that changes things, moving forward with
yeah.
people donating.
And so, okay, let's say I want to hire you
Okay.
to maximize my time with you.
Mhm.
What of my own research could I be doing so that when I come to you with the mission, should you choose to accept
Yeah.
it, I'm as prepared as I can possibly be? So, would it be opening an ancestry account and having my DNA done and looking at my family tree and having my birth certificates? What information could I have just as a baseline about me
Right.
that would help you fulfill any mission that I would present you with?
That's a great question. And you're 100% right with everything you said. The more folks can give me that they have, that allows me to then not have to go find it, but to just confirm that it's all correct. And sometimes
Yes.
people things aren't correct. Usually it's not always, who your mother was, although it can be. Um,
Whoa. So wait, let me just dive into that for a second. How often is the information on Ancestry or some of these other sites incorrect in your
it
experience?
can be relatively often. I call
Wow.
everything Ancestry gives me, and they have these cute little green leaves that come up. And I don't call those green leaves, I call them breadcrumbs. And they're really just
Yeah.
leading me to look at something that may or may not be true.
Mm.
The same goes for it's now owned by Ancestry. It's called Find a Grave, and it's where
Yeah.
you go find people's graves, and people love doing this. It's like a whole separate little group where people go take pictures of lots of gravestones. But
Whoa.
I have one that just came up for a client that the parents listed for the person who died are not the right people. And they're listed on Find a Grave. So at some point, soon, I need to go in and send a note to the person who created this and say, these aren't the
Whoa.
right people. And I've had to do that before for some of my relatives, if maybe they were said that they were in the wrong place, like the wrong cemetery or the wrong,
Mm.
um, time, like the date's wrong. Because
So, if this is important to you,
Mhm.
really knowing the truth about your history and who you are and where you came from,
Yes.
hiring a genealogist
Mhm.
like you to verify the
Yes.
accuracy and
Yes.
authenticity of the information that you think you have
Yes.
is a very, very well use of time and resources.
It is. It is. And, it again keeps me from having to find people. If they already know who someone is, then I don't have to find who they think it is. I just now can see who they think it is and make sure that that is who it is. And then I can keep going. So maybe we can get farther back because you've gotten birth certificates or you've got this bar book like my mom gave me that's this giant doorstop that then I can go through and look at these names and dates and things and say, okay, are these really the right ones? And then if they are, great, let's keep going.
Yeah, I want to go back to this idea of the brick wall,
Okay.
of coming up against these brick walls. So, can you give me some other examples? Like you talked about your own personal brick wall,
Mhm.
with your family. What are some of the other brick walls that you might encounter where you've got to back up in the maze and go down a different path?
I'm thinking right off the top of my head on a couple of projects I've done that were DNA specific, where either there was no understanding at all of who a biological relative was, and that was the brick wall of like, we have no clue. We just need to know. We'd love to know. And being able to actually find a first cousin that had done DNA, and therefore
Yeah.
we now know who this is. And it was a brick wall, but it didn't take a long time. Also having a client who came to me saying either this person or this person was the grandfather. Which one was it? I got to show up and say it was actually the third person that you didn't know about. So,
Whoa. Yeah.
and that's a brick wall too. So, those are both DNA specific, but often it can be same name, or there were people back in the 1800s, 17, who knows, far back that would disappear and change their name and just do different
Mm.
things. And so a lot of those, I have not done a ton of research in that regard, but I've been to several presentations by other genealogists who have, had to figure out those brick walls with same named individuals. Is this person really the right person, or did he change his
Mm.
name and move, and all of that. So there can be lots of brick walls.
Yeah. So if you go down this path,
Hmm.
you meaning a client,
Right.
not you as the genealogist, you've got to be open.
Yeah.
You've got to want to know, and you've got to be open to being shocked, being pleasantly surprised, and everything in between,
Yep.
right? Or being validated. I mean, and
Exactly.
everything. And that
Exactly.
it's going to be a mixed bag because
Hmm.
you really don't know what you're going to find. And
Right.
so I imagine that there's courage involved in that quest for information.
For sure.
So, what's it like for you when you come up against resistance, where someone thinks that they want to know and they've actually sought out your services and your help and really think they want to go down this path, and it suddenly takes a turn and you've renegotiated the space, by saying, "Hey, do you want me to?" And they say yes. And then when you actually present them with the information, oh gosh, what's that like for you when there is a little bit of resistance about the truth of it or the
Yeah.
validity of it?
I mean, luckily, I haven't had a ton of that, but I have had some. And often, the hardest part is me figuring out how to call them or email them or, tell them
Oh, bet.
we need to change order, change course.
Whew.
Um,
Draw on that communications degree again.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, that's usually me kind of saying, like, I know I'm right, but I don't know that they're going to think I'm right, and kind of thinking through the
Yeah.
best way to approach that. And
This
again,
whole "I know I'm right" thing, I wanna ask you about this though. Like, how right do you have to be before you present the information? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you validate the authenticity of the information that you think you've uncovered?
yeah. So, as genealogists, we have kind of rules about what you've researched and how you've researched it and how
Yeah.
much you've researched and how, is it a document that was an original document that you're reviewing, or if it's a document that somebody, rewrote 5 times and put it in a book somewhere and it might be wrong. Um, nothing is ever going to be perfect with that, and never is a client, most likely. I mean, this would be like, the amazing client I've never had, to say I always want every single detail about every single person that you could possibly ever find so that this is 100% accurate. That's usually not the case. And so it's more about me knowing, through all the education I've had since the summer of 2020, um, to understand, have I found the most likely, appropriate, correct documents? Have I found everything that, will help me be able to then say to this person, I think that this is 100% true. Um, it's just part of what we've learned in our work. And just really have to be careful. And I always have a paragraph at the end of a client report that says, there's likely more work we could do, because
Mm,
most of them aren't hiring me to do every possible thing, as I said.
yeah.
And so a lot of times I will put things that have come up for me as next steps, as, what if, if you wanted more research, here's like 5 things that we should look for,
Yeah.
to be able to, get a little closer to knowing that we have the truth.
Ooh, I mean, gosh, I feel like that's a Pandora's box. I mean, I don't know if I would be able to stop. I have to be honest. Like I just love finding out about stuff, and once I uncovered one thing, I'd need to know that. And oh, tell me about that. Tell me about that. I mean, I'm addicted to those shows, who do you
Oh yeah.
think you come, where do you think you came from? And where they present, um people with their history, and
Right.
you sort of cobble together this story. And I mean, I just love those shows. They're just so fascinating.
Yeah.
So, wow. Okay. What's your favorite bit of genealogy that you just really, really love investigating?
Oh gosh, I think having, at least in my own family, some of the things that I have been able to find that no one else had really ever had, or at least had shared with me if they did have them, were, people's information, either their wills and who they left things to. And maybe they're even in, have their signature still, like that this is still the right version that has their official signature on it, maybe from the 1800s or possibly 1700s. And, seeing what they gave to each child. And sometimes there were, you know, things said that maybe the child had disappeared, and this child will be given this money if they're found within this amount of time, and if they're not, then this money's going to the other siblings. And so learning some of those kinds of things, which, again, it's not something people sit around at, the dinner table talking about necessarily. It can be really interesting and give you some extra information that's better, or not better, it's more than just knowing, well, this person died on this date. Well, but then this
Mm,
is how he left things to his family. And what he left the family, gun, or he left the farm, or he left, there was one, he said, I don't want anybody to ever take down the trees in my,
mm.
like, he was a, early environmentalist. He wanted to keep all those
Yeah.
trees.
Yeah. So
And
you're talking about legacy.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And
I mean,
so,
this idea of identity just
mhm,
constantly fascinates me, and how we understand ourselves and where we fit into the
mhm,
world,
mhm,
and how we form our identity, how we reform it or
mhm,
relook at it with a fresh perspective. And, with the work that you do, it is an opportunity
mhm.
to look at things in a different way, to look at
Absolutely.
yourself and your family in a different way.
Absolutely.
And I would certainly welcome that opportunity. I mean, it's what a beautiful alternate lens, or it just gives you more choices. I think.
Yes.
I think this is such important work, and I thank you for doing it. So you can connect with Dana at generationjonesgenealogy.com. What an amazing website. I love that. So, Dana, I always end every episode with the same question. And as we're constellating around identity,
Right.
and our sense of identity and who we are and what we're capable of or what we deserve,
Right.
very much determines how we embrace our it has to be me moments and go after what we want, and listen to our intuition and give
Mhm.
ourselves permission to dream big or go beyond what our family members have done,
Right.
etc. For somebody who's listening, who has a dream in their heart, which is everybody listening, really, isn't it? And they don't feel like they have what it takes to make it happen, what would you say to them?
Gosh, dream big and think about how, if you're wanting to start something new, like become a genealogist, when you've liked it your whole life, but you've never done it as a job. Um, but just knowing what it's going to help you understand about yourself and about where you come from, regardless of what it is. So if it's a job, if it's a passion that you want to try, whatever it is, just knowing that it's giving you what you need to know about you, but it's also really giving you that ancestry information. And sometimes knowing what might have been difficult for your ancestors, but what might have been positive, and sort of how that all has come to you to give you what you need to make that happen.
Oh, yeah. I'm just thinking about, well, everything that we've been talking about
Mhm.
and how knowing your history and where you came from is a really big part of the puzzle.
It is. It really is. It
Yeah,
is.
if we're, really embracing the theme of this show, of it has to be me, and
Right.
really listening to your intuition, having the courage to of the consequences of your intuition
Right.
and listening to it and going after what you want, you do need that solid
Mhm.
foundation of understanding who you are and where you came from.
Yeah.
Which was,
And I
one of the big reasons why I wanted to talk to you,
right.
because I do think that um often, so many of us just don't have a lot of the pieces of the puzzle
Right.
of our
Right.
familial history. And as I'm sitting here listening to you, kind of going, I want to know more about it. Fortunately for me, I came from a family where um, we're really interested in history,
Mhm.
particularly my mother's side of the family. And
Mhm.
my mother then became very interested in my father's side of the family. And she was just constantly asking questions, of my dad's elderly relatives and sitting around, and I think my mum knows more about my dad's family than my dad does, right? But we're all really, really interested in it. But unless you document it and have it available,
Right.
as you were talking about with the communities in Africa or oral
Right.
traditions around the world where
Right.
ancestors are telling stories and
Mhm.
not necessarily writing them down. It's an oral history.
Yes.
The value of
Mhm.
writing down stories, or these days with multimedia,
Yeah.
getting on Zoom and interviewing a relative, a
100%.
grandparent or a great
Mhm.
grandparent, or listening to their stories, even
Yeah.
if it's not a family tree necessarily, or I'm related to this person or that person, but tell me your story.
Right.
Tell me about what happened in your childhood, what you were interested in, what you did as a kid, what
Mhm.
mattered back then. What was it like to live through that war? What was it like to, you know,
Right.
I, I think that we often underestimate the
Mhm.
value of listening to the stories of people in your family and,
Definitely.
and friends and community, So
Definitely.
I just think it's a beautiful thing. I mean, I just love story.
Mhm.
So you being inside of these stories all the time, it must be like a choose your own adventure story every day,
Ooh,
right?
it can be. And I think one of the key things too is for people as they're hearing these stories or learning things about, their ancestry, is really not having judgment and making sure that what you're hearing,
Ooh,
it was a different
yeah,
time. It
that's
was a
big.
different place. It may not be what you would have done. It may not be what somebody else at that time period may have done, but it's what happened.
Mm,
And so just understanding why it happened, how it happened, what happened, and kind of owning that and not being judgmental of that. I think when I'm able to give that to clients and they're willing to receive that and not be a little
mm.
like, oh, I don't want to know, it just gives them so much more to know about themselves and understand how they became what they are.
Well, that's a beautiful place to end for today,
Okay.
isn't it? Of
It is.
just looking at yourselves and others and your stories without judgment,
Yes.
and
Yes.
seeing things for what they are and what you can learn from them. That's
Definitely.
just
Definitely.
beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. What a lovely
Thank you.
conversation.
I've enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh, I am even more fired up to learn about my family history because knowing about our ancestors and our family members really informs our sense of identity and belonging. And I really appreciated what Dana was saying about looking at any information that you get without judgment, that it may be from a different time and place, or even if relatives are living, they may be from a different culture across the world or been brought up differently. And any of the information can help you come to a better understanding about who you are and why your family system is the way that it is. I found it fascinating what she was saying about generational trauma and how genealogy can uncover that and can also be very helpful in coming to a greater awareness about ourselves. I loved all the practical tips about navigating ancestry.com and 23andMe and my heritage for European information, family tree DNA. And, there's just so many amazing resources. I liked hearing about the pros and cons of things and the pitfalls that you can get into and the benefits, learning about DNA testing, how you can keep it public or private, and thinking about how you can hire a genealogist to help navigate the journey to maximize your time and resources, learning about what we need, just the basic information that can help get us started, having the name and the birth and death dates, and as much information as possible to help a genealogist uncover the truth. I did appreciate what she was saying about the accuracy, that because information is changing and there's limits on information that we do and are able to get access to, that it's impossible to determine that something is 100% accurate, and that most clients are just looking to get closer to the truth about their family. I really loved what she was saying about patience. She was referring to genealogy, that it takes patience to follow the clues and breadcrumbs and right away for birth certificates and more information. But I think that that basic principle can be applied to anything outside of genealogy when we're working towards our it has to be me, or putting the puzzle together, that it just takes patience and tenacity, and you just got to put one foot in front of the other and keep putting the pieces in place to get the full picture. I loved what she said about following your passion. Do things that help you understand more about yourself. Oh, yes, yes to that. So, if you want to hire a genealogist, Dana is amazing. She's in California. You can connect with her at generationjonesgenealogy.com. We've got all of her links in the show notes. And let me know in the Facebook group if you're hiring a genealogist or what you've uncovered on some of these platforms. I just find this area just so fascinating. So, yeah, I can't wait to hear your stories.
I want to hear about your It Has to Be Me story. So head on over to ithastobeme.com/stories to share it in our free community. You can also join the conversations we're having about this episode and others. I'm Tess Masters. Join me next week and we'll dive inside another great story to help us go from dreaming to doing.